Two people, same paycheck, same $60,000 saved, same ordinary Tuesday. Ben buys a rental house. Claire buys index funds. Ben spends his afternoon signing 30 pages of mortgage paperwork and picking up the keys to a real, physical house he can drive past on his way to work. Claire spends about 9 minutes on her phone, taps one button and gets a confirmation email. For the next 20 years, one of them looks like a genius at every dinner party. The other one quietly, invisibly, pulls ahead. And here's the part that should bother you. Almost nobody can tell you which is which, because the real answer has nothing to do with houses or stocks. It comes down to one number that nobody on your feed is measuring. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So let's actually run this, not the fantasy version. The real one, every repair, every empty month, every hour, every dollar. By the end you'll know exactly which one makes you a millionaire faster. And it's probably not the one you'd bet on. Here's the trap most people fall into. When they argue real estate versus stocks, they argue about the wrong thing. They compare the rent check to the stock chart, but that's not where this is won or lost. This is really a story about two kinds of money. There's loud money, money you can see, touch, point at, and brag about. A house is loud money. And there's quiet money, money that just sits there, invisible, doing nothing you can feel. An index fund is quiet money. Loud money feels like winning. Quiet money feels like nothing at all. And for 20 years, that feeling is going to lie to you about who's actually ahead. I'm Grant. I've spent a long time watching people build wealth and watching smart people talk themselves right out of it. If this is your kind of thing, the subscribe button is right there. Now let's keep this fair, keep it honest, and follow the money to the very last dollar. Ben and Claire are the same age. They both earn $70,000 a year. They both saved $60,000. Same city, same starting line. The only difference is what they do with that money. Ben puts his $60,000 down on a $300,000 rental, a tidy little 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. 20% down, a 30-year mortgage at about 7%. His payment lands around $1,600 a month. He finds a tenant willing to pay $2,100. On paper, that's $500 of profit every month before he spends a dime on anything else. Ben feels unstoppable. Claire takes her $60,000 and drops it into a total market index fund. No tenant, no keys, no leverage. She sets up an automatic $400 a month and closes the app. Her coworkers ask what she's investing in. She says, index funds. They nod politely and change the subject. Nobody is impressed, nobody ever is. Day one, Ben has a house, a tenant, and a story to tell. Claire has a brokerage account and an email. It is not close in how it feels. But feelings and math are two very different animals. Let's watch them run. For the first few years, Ben is living the landlord dream. Rent hits his account on the first of every month. He drives past his property and thinks, I own that. At tax time, he writes off mortgage interest and something called depreciation and shaves a little off his bill. Every payment builds a sliver of equity. Homes down the street tick up in value. Everything about this feels real, solid, and smart. Claire logs in once a quarter. The number goes up a little, down a little, up a little more. Year 1, her $60,000 becomes about $66,000. Year 2, maybe $73,000. There's no key in her pocket, no tenant texting her. Nothing to point at from the car window, just a number on a screen that she barely looks at. So through year 3, Ben looks like the obvious winner, but let's do something Ben never does. Let's count everything. Over 3 years, Ben collects roughly $75,000 in rent. His mortgage payments eat about $57,000 of that. That leaves around $18,000. Sounds great until the real world shows up. Property taxes, about $3,600 a year. Insurance, another $1,800. Then the house starts asking for money. A water heater dies, $1,200. A section of roof leaks, $3,000. A tenant moves out and the place sits empty for 6 weeks, so that's 2 months of lost rent plus cleaning and relisting on top. And then there's the part no spreadsheet shows. Ben manages it himself to save money, so the phone rings at 10 at night. He's showing the unit on Saturdays. He's coordinating a plumber on his lunch break. After every real cost, Ben's actual profit over 3 years isn't $18,000. It's somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000, and that's before you count a single hour of his time. Meanwhile, Claire has done nothing. Her $60,000 plus her monthly contributions has quietly grown to about $76,000. 0 phone calls, 0 emergencies, 0 weekends. Now, before the real estate crowd sends me angry comments, Ben still has one powerful thing on his side: leverage. He controls a $300,000 asset with only $60,000 of his own money. Claire controls $60,000 with $60,000. When that house goes up in value, Ben's gains are calculated on the full $300,000, not just his down payment. That is the single biggest advantage in real estate, and stock investors can't easily copy it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Here's the thing nobody at the barbecue tells you. The rent check is the loudest number in real estate and the most misleading, because a long list of costs comes out of it before you keep a single dollar. Vacancy: the typical rental sits empty about a month a year. That's a full mortgage payment with no income to cover it. Maintenance: the rule of thumb is 1 to 2% of the home's value every year. On a $300,000 house, that's $3,000 to $6,000 a year. Some years it's a $20 washer. Other years it's a $9,000 HVAC unit that dies in August, and you can't say later because your tenant is sweating and threatening to leave. Big-ticket items: roofs last 20 to 25 years, furnaces 15 to 20, water heaters about 10. These aren't maybes, they're guaranteed future bills that arrive in chunks of $5,000 to $15,000. If you're not setting money aside every month, you're not running a business, you're running on luck. Management: hire someone and it's 8 to 10% of the rent gone. Do it yourself and you've just taken a second job you never applied for and don't get paid for. And the risk nobody wants to talk about: a bad tenant. Someone who stops paying and knows exactly how slow eviction is can cost you months of lost rent plus legal fees. One bad tenant can erase a whole year of profit. None of that shows up in the $500 a month fantasy, but all of it shows up eventually. By year 5, Ben is deep in the reality of the job. He's on his third tenant. He's replaced the roof for $8,500. He's fixed a burst pipe. He raised the rent, which helps, but his taxes and insurance climbed too. His real return, the money he actually pockets against the money he put in, is hovering around 3 to 5%. Not bad, but nowhere near the 15% he told his friends about. Claire is still doing absolutely nothing, and that nothing is starting to compound. By year 7 her account is somewhere around $140,000. She didn't pick a single stock, she didn't time anything, she just didn't touch it. Now here's what's happening underneath. Ben's wealth is growing, but slowly, and it demands constant attention. Claire's wealth is growing in a curve, slow at first, then faster, then a little frightening. Compounding is boring for 5 years and astonishing for the next 15. The gains start earning their own gains. That's the quiet money finally getting loud. Let me give you the real numbers on appreciation, because this is where the myth lives. Over the long run, U.S. home prices have risen around 4 to 4.5% a year. Sounds strong, but here's the part they leave out. After you subtract inflation, the actual real growth of home prices over the last century has been under 1% a year. Robert Shiller, the economist who literally built the home price index, found homes barely outrun inflation on their own. What makes real estate work isn't the house going up. It's the leverage and the tenant paying down your loan. Take those two away and a house is one of the slowest growing assets you can own. Stocks are the opposite story. The market has averaged roughly 10% a year before inflation over the long haul, closer to 7% after. And here's the quiet secret. Almost half of the stock market's total return over the last 80 years didn't come from prices going up at all. It came from dividends, quietly reinvesting, buying more shares while you slept. So let's jump to year 20 and settle this. Ben's house has grown at about 4% a year. It's now worth roughly $650,000. His mortgage is down to around $140,000. That puts his equity, what he'd actually keep, at about $510,000. Add the modest cash flow he scraped together over the years and call it somewhere around $550,000. That's real, that's genuinely impressive. 20 years of being a landlord built real wealth. Now Claire. Her 60,000 plus 400 a month growing at market rates for 20 years lands somewhere between about $520,000 and $700,000, depending on whether the market gave her 8% or 10%. She put in about $156,000 total. Everything above that is pure compounding. Look at where they land, same ballpark, roughly $500,000 each, give or take. If you only look at the final dollar figure, you'd call it a tie. But that is exactly the mistake, because the dollars are not the whole story, and here's the number nobody measures. Return on your life. Ben earned his $500,000 with hundreds of hours of labor, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, one asset in one zip code, and a decade of 10 p.m. phone calls. Claire earned hers with a 9-minute setup and a monthly transfer she forgot about. Same money, wildly different price. If you measure wealth in dollars, it's a tie. If you measure it in dollars per hour of your life, it isn't close. Claire didn't just match Ben. She beat him, using a fraction of the one thing you can never buy back. That's why quiet money wins the race most people don't even know they're running. And here's where the title question finally gets answered. Which one makes you a millionaire faster? For most people, honestly, the quiet money. Because Claire can push a little harder without pushing her whole life. If she bumps her $400 to $600 a month, her 20-year number climbs past $600,000, no new debt, no new tenant, no new job. In stocks, adding money is one tap. In real estate, adding money usually means another mortgage, another roof, another tenant, and double the work. One of these scales while you sleep. The other one scales only if you're willing to work more. Run the clock forward and Claire crosses 1,000,000 years before Ben does, because her money compounds without permission, and his requires his weekends. Now let me be fair, because if I only showed you the ugly side of real estate, I'd be doing exactly what every stock influencer does. Stocks have real pain that people love to skip over. Volatility is brutal. In 2008, the market fell about 37%. In early 2020, it dropped a third in a matter of weeks. If Claire watched $150,000 fall to $95,000 in a month, that is not a number on a screen. That's a knot in your stomach. And the data is clear. Most people panic and sell at the bottom, locking in the loss. The market's biggest enemy isn't the crash, it's the investor. Stocks don't send you a check either. A total market fund pays maybe 1.5% in dividends. That's not replacing anyone's paycheck. And stocks can't do what real estate does with leverage and taxes. That 5-to-1 leverage is powerful when values rise. Depreciation lets real estate investors deduct their building's value from their taxable income even while it's appreciating, a legal tax shelter stocks simply don't have. And a 1031 exchange lets you roll profits into the next property and defer the taxes entirely. So real estate absolutely wins in specific situations. If you're in a market where rent is at least about 1% of the purchase price a month, the cash flow works from day one. If you treat it as a business, screening tenants, budgeting for the big repairs, building systems, the leverage can push you past stocks. And if you house hack, living in one unit and renting the others, you can crush your own housing cost while building equity. The stock market can't do that. Real estate isn't a bad investment. It's a misunderstood one. Which brings us to the biggest myth of all, the one you've definitely heard. 90% of millionaires made their money in real estate. You'll see it on every guru's thumbnail. Here's the truth. That line traces back to Andrew Carnegie over 100 years ago, and there's no solid data behind it. When researchers actually studied over 10,000 American millionaires, most of them didn't get rich flipping houses. They got there through steady income and boring, consistent investing in retirement accounts and index funds. Yes, plenty of millionaires own real estate, but owning a home is not the same as your wealth coming from real estate. Correlation is not the engine. So let's bring Ben and Claire home. They both walked away from that ordinary Tuesday certain they'd made the smart move. Ben trusted the loud money, the house he could see. Claire trusted the quiet money, the number she couldn't feel. 20 years later, they have roughly the same net worth, but Ben paid for his in hours, stress, and debt. Claire paid for hers in patience. Here's the real trap, and it was never real estate or stocks. The trap is choosing either one because of a headline, a podcast clip, or something your uncle said at Thanksgiving, without ever running the full numbers for your own life. So the next time someone tells you real estate always wins or stocks always win, ask them one quiet question. Did you count everything, including your hours? Because the answer that counts everything is the only answer that's actually true. And now you can count it. Most people never will. If Ben and Claire's 20 years told you something you hadn't thought about, do me a favor and stick around. The next one is about what happens when you do both at the same time, and the math surprises almost everyone. I'm Grant. Keep it calm, keep it consistent, and let the quiet money do the loud work.